Good morning and welcome everyone to our SATIB Cybersecurity webinar this morning. Many of us have had to work from home since March, and we've had to do it quite quickly, so there wasn't a great deal of time for us to get ourselves equipped and ready to deal with those nasty cyber criminals. COVID's also led to a bit of a seismic shift towards digitization. So those of us who would not ordinarily have gone the digital route have been forced to go into the digital route. And so now, as you can see, we're meeting on Zoom, and we might have met face-to-face in previous years. So that opens us up to some real vulnerabilities. And you've heard of many of them, I'm sure: phishing, vishing, identity theft, ransomware, etc. But there are many others that we don't really know about, and we always think it's going to happen to someone else. So thankfully, we can lean on experts to help us mitigate those risks. And I'm very pleased to say we have 3 of them in the room today, brought to you by SATIB. From I2 Special Risks, we have Cyber Underwriter Candace Sutherland. And from Mazars, we have the Director of IT Advisory, Terence Govender, and the National Director of Forensic Services, Christo Sneeman. I'm almost a bit scared I've done something wrong. And as always, the chat's open, so let us know where you're connecting from. And we would love to get your questions. This is going to be a very interactive session. So please pose the questions that you've got, concerns that you may have around cybersecurity, in that Q&A folder at the bottom of your screen. We are also recording the session, so we will release it in the coming days if you'd like to watch it again or send it to a colleague, because it's important that we all understand what the risks are. And want to thank you again for joining us for this important SATIB cybersecurity session. So with that out of the way, Q&A, as I said, is in the folder at the bottom of the screen. We are recording it, so we would love for you to share that with your colleagues, just so that we can make sure that they don't get stuck. And I'm going to hand over to Christo now, who I've worked with for many years. He is an absolute whiz when it comes to this kind of thing. So I'm very pleased to have him in the starting gates. Christo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalia. Just a sec, apologies for that. Sorry, guys. Thank you very much. Yes, we've got a bit of a load shedding situation here in Melkbos, and if I go unexpectedly down, just bear with me. So good morning, Natalia, Terence, and Candace, and thank you for facilitating this very important webinar. Also, good morning to everyone joining the webinar. This is our third webinar focusing on cybercrime, and this time focusing on the tourism and hospitality sector. With our first 2 seminars, the term lockdown was still relatively new. However, now we've passed on this phase, and we've seen how quickly we adapted to make home our place of work. Also now, with level 2 regulations gazetted, interprovincial travel allowed, alcohol ban lifted, the tourism and hospitality sector can start and in some instances get their businesses up and running again. And again, similar, when we are down in lockdown, our focus is distracted. The criminals, and specifically cyber criminals, are leveraging on the pandemic situation on a global basis. Already my team and I have investigated several matters involving cybercrime, of which I've reported 2 cases to the South African Police Services on behalf of complainants who's based in Italy. And they purchased face masks from fraudulent suppliers in South Africa, and the losses run into millions. One of our cyber forensic consultants has also recently identified one syndicate who was linked to 120 websites selling PPE and solar equipment and generators. Victims would engage with the so-called Saparma group, procure masks, make payment, however the stock never gets delivered. Fortunately, with the help of the Internet Service Provider Association in South Africa, takedown notices were issued to the internet service providers who were hosting the active websites, and all the scamming websites were removed. Another scam we see regularly is where cyber criminals purport to be a director or a CEO of a company and request the payroll office to change banking details, and subsequently funds are paid into the criminal's bank account. The criminal has access and knows exactly who you are and who to contact. They're also in possession of false banking confirmation letters. Terence will discuss in more detail around this. But before I hand you over to Terence, just the last important aspect I would like to emphasize. When you receive a request for change of banking details, do not accept the correspondence you receive as valid. contact the client, the supplier or contractor directly and make sure about the change request. I've seen this in so many instances. In fact, this morning, I had a client in Durban contacting me and asking me they need an attorney because their funds were paid into a different bank account. And the problem is, as soon as you contact the client and understand the circumstances, you will find out that the staff member acted on an email request and they didn't follow up the proper procedures. And hundreds of thousands are being lost in this manner. But Terry's going to speak more about this, and thank you, guys.
Over to you, Terence, and you can share your screen. You're on mute.
Sorry, guys, give me a second. I just want to share my screen. Krista, can you just stop sharing your screen for a second? Okay, can everyone see my screen?
We can indeed.
Excellent. All right. Good morning, everybody. Natalia, thank you for the opportunity to, give everyone a heads up or a direction of cyber resilience and where we're going. Christo, thanks for that. I'll certainly continue and hopefully elaborate. The idea obviously is to leave you with some information, I think, as best as possible, so that you are, as the famous saying goes, forewarned is forearmed from that perspective, and really just give you, I think, what's happening out there in the industry from that side. So let me just move us along. So what we're going to look at is really what is the actual definition of cybercrime? What does it mean from that perspective? There's various definitions, but I think let's just dummy it down to, I think, what does it mean to the layman, to you and I at the end of the day? What's happening in the world out there? What has COVID-19 brought in the context of cybercrime? And most importantly, I think, is the industries that are affected or that are targeted and why they are targeted. And what can you do as an employer or as an employee to safeguard yourself in your home environment as well as in your organization, especially as Krista mentioned, as we start to understand the new norm in working from home from that perspective. So let's just understand quickly. I'm going to give you the US Department of Defense definition, and then I'll try and sort of unpack a couple of key words. So cybercrime is a computer-oriented crime. It is a crime that involves a computer and a network, so in the internet. The computer may have been used in the commission of a crime, or it may be the target. Cybercrimes can be defined as offenses that are committed against individuals or groups of individuals with a criminal motive to intentionally harm the reputation of the victim or mental harm or loss to the victim directly or indirectly. The two most important things there is the fact that there's a computer involved, and in fact they say that the cybercrime is now the new faceless crime that is currently taking place. So it involves a computer, it involves someone who is the target, and the last words, operative words, is there's an intent to cause harm, and there's an intent to almost solicit or to gain some form of value from someone from that perspective. And that's exactly what happens. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a person. It could be a computer against a computer, which you never know who's sitting at the back end. And I'll talk through that as we go along. So hoping you have a better understanding of what is a cybercrime and the definition from where it comes from. So let's look at what's happening in the world today. Firstly, we've heard and we've seen, and I'm going to refer that back to December 2012, Moroccans hacked South African government. In January 2012, Postbank lost 30 million rand to a high-tech heist by cyber crimes. And in June 2016, Standard Bank was hit by a sophisticated coordinated fraud incident by a Japanese cyber criminal syndicate. So you can clearly see that cyber crime is taking place, it's happening. South Africa's average data breach jumps to 33.3 million, and this was as of July 2019. So basically what this article was about was the fact that the cost of a data breach, if you consider if I'm breached and there's records that are stolen or is on the dark web, to get it back is a ransom amount of money that I got to pay. Then there's the cost to remediate. So there's the post cost to fix up. Then there's costs my production costs that I've lost. And then there's obviously potentially not at this stage, but in fact, as of 1 July, there's the cost to the regulator and the fine that you're going to have to pay to the regulator. So if you add all of that up, that's the average cost of a data breach that you can assume will be more or less. Life healthcare hit by cyber attack. This was as recent as literally about a month and a half ago. And again, literally this happened, I think, on Sunday night into Monday. Momentum and Metropolitan hit by cyber attack. Those two are quite pertinent. I'm going to talk about that and you'll see why in a minute. And at the same time, you've got the importance of corporate governance. So governance is increasing as these attacks start to increase, and overall corporate governance. If you look at the fall of Steinhoff, when you look at government and state capture, you know, the importance of corporate governance is just increasing. King 4, for those of you who know, literally there is not isolated to just corporate. King 4 refers to SMMEs, any business essentially, public sector and private sector. So you can't hide. Before, King 2 and King 3 was all around corporates, but it's in fact not as you go forward in the new version of King. And then recently, the POPI Act, further sections of the Act have been promulgated, and is now coming to effect. And essentially, you need to comply with the protection of personal information effectively from 1 June 2021. So the regulator has given everyone 12 months to comply. And that brings its own set of challenges in terms of why cyber hacking is taking place and your importance and your need to protect what we call PI, or personal identifiable information. So above all of that, we now have this lovely thing called coronavirus outbreak. And you might think, well, what has coronavirus outbreak got to do with whatever is happening in the cyber world? Well, let's unpack and let's understand why that's the case. Let's just look at a couple of interesting facts quickly. So 75 records are stolen every second by hackers. At the same time, data breaches are as a result of human error through phishing or business process errors. And phishing I'll talk about as we go into the presentation, but essentially it's a way of soliciting information through an email or through any means, and that information is then used against you to breach or to solicit or to obtain your financial information and to obviously gain financially from that perspective. And that's an important number, because if we can reduce that number, and Krista also mentioned the clever scheming ways that these cyber criminals operate, if we can reduce that number, then you immediately eliminate 24% chance of having a breach. Around about 30,000 websites are hacked daily. Just by the way, as of May, and it might have been increased now, 20,000 websites were registered since the start of COVID in the beginning of January, essentially. So all fraudulent websites, around about 20,000 fraudulent websites. Christos mentioned some of them that solicit PPE equipment. Those are all fraudulent websites. And the average cost of a stolen record on the black market is around about 3,500 Rand. And again, in my next slide, I'll show you why and how, what's become so crucial in that respect. So, as I said, if I look at this, information is received from the cost of a data breach report, the Panamon Institute with IBM. This is 2019, the 2020 has just released. I don't have a copy of it yet. But essentially, if you look at this, it's on the left-hand side, you've got the industries or the sectors. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the cost of a record on the black market. So you can see anything from health, financial services, pharmaceuticals, technology, energy. And you can pretty much see that the two highest or the three highest is health, financial services, and services overall. And you'll see there is hospitality at the bottom, more also not in the top, but still attracting quite a bit of money. And I would say, you know, the travel hospitality industry is probably between hospitality and services per se. Why is it so much? It's because it's got what we call personal identifiable information, and this information could be used. And personal identifiable information is everything from your name, your surname, your ID number, your financial information, all of that information, medical information, etc. And it becomes valuable because of the fact that it could be used to manipulate so much, and it could cause so much of harm from that perspective. And hence you'll see in my previous slides, you'll see the target was financial services. And recently, just in South Africa alone, you saw the target on Life Healthcare, and you saw the target on Momentum and Metropolitan. Around about a year and a half ago was also Liberty at the same time. So you can clearly see now the cost of a record. And just very quickly, if you were to take the average of 3,500 Rand and you had something like 10,000 records, that's sitting at 35 million Rand already ransom that you'd have to pay. The average cost to remediate, to fix the breach, is anywhere going to be between 3 and 5 million Rand to improve your security systems, etc., etc. And then obviously, as effective from June next year, will be the regulator's fine, which could go up to 10 million Rand. So you are going to be in for quite a packet if your information is stolen, or it's what we call locked, where you are asked for ransom for that information, or else it's exposed on the black market from that perspective. You've also heard of Garmin recently, who was hacked for the second time. And Garmin, unfortunately, I don't know the number that it's disclosed, but it was a couple of $1 million that they had to pay to get their system and their client information back. So sometimes you have no option but to pay the ransomware from that perspective. So let's look at COVID-19 in the context of cybercrime. So lockdown came into play. It was to prevent the spread of coronavirus. It resulted in really, an unprecedented amount of work from home situations. Very few organizations have actually catered or prepared for this type of scenario. Most of them in their BCP planning have catered for a few people to work from home, or senior management, or essentially services that are deemed remote could work from home, but never an entire organization. All types of employees are vulnerable. So let's look at why. Generally, people tend to be, and I think it's the psyche, are more relaxed when they work from home, and they have this mindset of, it's not going to happen to me, and this only happens at the office. Remote working users don't often have antivirus software, don't have personal firewalls, and don't have virtual private network software at the same time. And home computers really protect their machines from that perspective. So, I have a machine at home, the kids use the machine, or my husband or my wife uses the machine, and there isn't really a need to protect it. And all of a sudden now the corporate network has extended to home, and now we're using the home Wi-Fi to connect to the corporate network, and vice versa from that perspective. So we bring and we breach the line of where does the corporate network start and stop, and where does my home network start and stop. And because of this, what it has led to is then the perfect playground for a cyber crime or for a hacker. So the targeted industries that we've come up with our research, and you've just saw evidence of it in the first slide, is really around sort of 3 key areas. And although, everyone still remains a target, so don't look at this and say, hold on a sec, these are the targets, so I'm okay. No, cyber criminals have no discrimination. They start from the weakest link, and they continue to exploit until they find and they break what they need. And maybe the quickest way and the easiest way to explain it is like, I walk past a house and I see a window that's open, and I see that there's no electric fence, there's no security bars, and I assume there's no alarm system. It's an easy target. I get into the house. But if I walk past a house and if I see that there's a burglar bar on, and I see there's electric fence, and I see there's beams, it becomes a deterrent. So that's exactly how they work. They look for the weakest link. They literally go down neighborhood to neighborhood, look for the weakest link and see, what can I exploit? And can I get from this house, could I get to the next house? So that's how they work from progressing what we call tree walking, when they go from one to the next. So they try and find one weakness in your environment, and they exploit that until they get more information and more information from that perspective. So let's look at very quickly, all home working users are the target. The reason being, as I said, they have little to no antivirus software. They don't have any personal firewalls. Not all computers are secure in linking, such as what we call virtual private network software, or VPN. And the virtual private network software is literally a dedicated encrypted link from yourself to the bank, or from yourself to your organization. So nothing, it's not information that traverses across the internet in plain text. And you also find with lockdown, people are spending a lot more time online. They're unable to go anywhere, so they tend to surf more, they tend to look at more sites. And because of that, they tend to track, and they tend to attract more presence, or leave what we call a digital footprint more online from that perspective. So home users are becoming the target. SMMEs. So SMMEs are becoming the target because they don't often have enough money to spend on fancy security software, on monitoring tools and resources. And if they do, it's very reactive. So they'll only pick it up hours after the breach has taken place, or days after the breach has taken place. And what we also saw is that, you know, there's been a move to offer online services. So because people couldn't get out and shop, we found a lot of restaurants, a lot of retailers started moving to online purchases. And because of that and that move very quickly, they never looked at the design of security and what it should be. So often you'd be putting your credit card details into a website, onto a database that is unsecure. And the hackers know this. So then they go for the SMMEs because they know that you've got credit card information, you've got financial information, you've got PI information, and it is not protected in the way or in the manner that it should be. And then SMEs become the target. So you could be sitting in there as within the travel industry, you could be sitting very well within this SMME category, and you would then need to reevaluate, if you haven't already, what security protocol and posture you would need to do. And then lastly is the medical and the health industry. And you've heard Krista already mention the fact that in the second point that you're finding that people are already having sites where, you know, they promise you or you're registered to receive PPE equipment, you pay the money and nothing gets delivered. You're also finding that hackers are claiming to have a sequence pathogen formulas in return for cryptocurrency. And I think as we get more and more desperate, you're going to find that people are going to take a chance, and you're going to find scientists are going to look at it and say, well, if we don't have something, maybe there is some formula out on the dark web. And what do we have to do? So you're going to find that more and more of these scams are going to continue, are going to originate. And like Christo's mentioned, you are going to see, and we have seen it already. In fact, after the first webinar we did, we literally had the call within hours afterwards to say, we think we've been scammed because this is what has happened. So it's real, it's happening. It's not stuff that you dreamed about. It's not stuff happening in other countries. It's happening, and it's happening in our own country. In fact, in the one scam, they mimicked a South African site, but it was actually traced back to a Nigerian crew that actually was operating, registered a website domain in South Africa, registered bank accounts in South Africa, but was exploiting and moving the money outside of South Africa into Nigeria and across the globe. So it becomes difficult to trace. So that's the type of scams that's happening. How is it happening? In something called phishing, ransomware, and malware. So let's start with phishing very quickly. Phishing is just a very sophisticated way of how people entice you. And what you would do is the famous one, I'm sure you've seen this, is you'll get an email from SARS saying, listen, you're entitled to a rebate, and we're all excited because I think we're all happy to get some money back from the taxman. And it says, you're entitled to this rebate, but please just complete this form, and within 48 hours, you'll have your money with you. And you go and you complete the form, and once you open the form, what actually happens is that there's a malware that gets downloaded to your machine. It either does, and as it says, this malware stands for malicious ware. It either locks your hard drive, and then all of a sudden you're requested to pay a ransom to get it back, or it exploits more information about you. It looks at your hard drive where you've got credit card information, where you've got your passwords. It extrapolates that information, and the next thing you know, money is disappearing out of your bank account. So that's phishing. We also have something called vishing, where people phone you or via SMS or voicemail, and people will phone you and say, listen, be phoning from so-and-so, and they're so sophisticated, they have your information. So one of the stories Krista asked me to share was really around, it happened where a CEO sent the payroll an email saying, please, can you transfer the payroll? My bank account has changed. Here it is. Complete valid email address, complete valid bank account linked to the bank itself. And literally the person payroll was just about to do the transaction when he said, let me just phone and verify. And when he phoned, the director said, I've got no idea what you're talking about. So everything was legit. The name, the email, the name of the director, the email address, the bank details, everything completely legit. So that's the sophistication that they come in with in these emails, that certain firewalls are not even able to pick these phishing campaigns up, as they call them. And then ultimately from the malware, you then get what we call ransomware, where you basically held for ransom, and you have to pay. Generally, it's now in cryptocurrency because it's completely untraceable, but basically you have to pay some form of money to actually retrieve your information from that perspective. And obviously to save yourself from reputational damage and et cetera, you then end up paying their money. And generally, from what we've seen, your decryption keys are released in the likes of garments, so they release it. A lot of people are saying, a lot of the hackers are saying that they will not target the medical industry, and I don't know whether it's more altruism or self-preservation, But we've clearly seen that didn't hold any weight or any water to the fact that we've had two major groups in South Africa already within a space of 2 months that have been hacked. So you can clearly see that is happening from that perspective. So moving on very quickly, what can I do to safeguard my organization and myself? So this is really, if there's anything you take out of this presentation, it would be the next couple of points that you see. So I think firstly is ensure that laptops have antivirus software and that USB ports are set to scan. Also, don't just accept my neighbor's given me a USB stick with some games, let me plug it in. You don't know, unless you set it to scan for malware and antivirusware, don't put it into your machine. You don't know where it's been and you don't know what malware could be downloaded. I've seen malware that exists in charging cables, so be careful of that. Ensure that the relevant virtual private network or VPN software, or what we call two-factor authentication, is installed or implemented. So if it is that you have to give staff laptops, ensure that they at least have VPN and two-factor authentication. All of you have seen it. It's when you bank and the bank sends you, you log in with your password, but the bank sends you a code that you got to put in, and the two of them will basically validate each other. Ensure hard disk encryption is installed. So if your laptop or your machine does get stolen, it's encrypted. No one can get access to it. Ensure that you're able to log into the network with a password. If there's no password, something is amiss. Ensure that personal PC and laptops have antivirus software. So in your home machine, please make sure you've loaded some form of antivirus software, which generally scans for malware, and that you have a personal firewall. So don't rely on just the company's firewall. And as Christo mentioned, please report any strange emails or activities within your PC or your laptop, any messages that you see coming up. And then obviously do not visit websites that are unsecure or suspicious, especially where you are transacting or providing what we call PI information. Look out for the HTTPS. The S is secure. So when you type in www and you don't see the lock on the left-hand side of the URL, that is not a secure site. So if any site is asking you for financial or credit card information, you don't see the S, it's extremely risky. I wouldn't transact if I were you. Do not provide any financial or personal information to anyone requesting it over the phone or internet. And again, what we were finding was that people were actually going out to houses saying that we understand you've been at the mall. Yes, everyone has been. And we actually need your information because we know that there's some people that have been affected. So we're just trying to do contact tracing. And then people end up giving out information. So please don't do that from that perspective. And do not respond to any COVID-19 emails requesting information. Google blocked over 250 emails related to COVID-19 spam emails between March and May. So just between those 3 months, 250 million emails were blocked. So just to give an indication. So that brings me to the end. I hope that you have obtained some information and learned something about just how to be a little bit more secure. And just doing that will reduce your chance by just 24–25%. I'm going to stop there and I think we'll take questions at the end, and I'm going to hand over to Candice.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time. Can I just get a yes that you can see the screen?
We can indeed.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So following on from Terence's presentation, there's a Norton Semantic report that did a survey of global survey. And what they said is that South Africa is the 3rd worst country in the world in terms of cybercrime attacks. And when they did this survey, they said that 84% of South African adults were a victim of cybercrime. So when I'm doing presentations to audiences, generally in person, and I say, who's been a victim of cybercrime? Someone, will always put up their hand, but it's 1 or 2. So how is it that 84% of us are victims of cybercrime? And the answer is because companies are hacked and they don't have the courtesy to tell us. So what our legislation currently states is, regardless of whatever company you are, if you suffer a breach, you do not have to tell anybody, not your shareholders, not your customers, suppliers, but POPI will change that. And if you do not notify the regulator, you as the company are in contravention of the act and you can face a 10 million rand fine. But I'll chat about POPI in a second. So South Africa has the highest probability of a data breach and unfortunately the highest probability of a repeat data breach. So just because you've suffered an incident doesn't mean that you're not going to suffer an incident again, unfortunately. So the global average is 28% versus South Africa, which is at 41%. And the average time it takes to identify a breach is 115 days. Average time to contain a breach is 40 days. So if you think in your own capacity, could you be down for 40 days? Never mind COVID and lockdown. Could you not have access to your data, not get access to your client list or your booking system for 40 days? That is something that could financially cripple any company. The top 3 cost reducing factors: 1 was an incident response team, 2, extensive use of encryption, and 3, participating in threat sharing. So I just want to spend a second talking about some South African companies that have been hacked. And following on from what Terence said, I'll touch on Postbank. So Postbank had hired an IT professional. His name was Israel Basung. He was specifically placed into Postbank by a cybercrime syndicate with the sole purpose of stealing funds. What he did is he created 103 ghost client accounts. He changed that ATM withdrawal limit from 1,000 to 500,000 Rand. And then over a period of 3 days, that syndicate visited 5,437 ATMs. You can imagine how many people it would take to visit 5,437 ATMs in 3 short days. And they managed to withdraw 30 million Rand of the 42 million Rand that Israel Basung had deposited amongst those accounts. The worst part about this is that a mere 18 months later, that exact individual was hired by Gautrain. So Gautrain's business policy is that unless you have access to funds or you're in a managerial position, they do not do a background check on you. So they did not do a background check on Israel Basung. They hired him, and he was currently facing charges for the Postbank heist. So a simple, quick background check would have saved them 11 million Rand. That's what it cost. So what Israel did while he was in the employ of Gautrain is he went around to any person in a managerial or supervisory position with a memory stick. He said he had to do an update on their system. He's from IT. Obviously, that's the person that you trust. Go have a smoke. Go have a cup of coffee. I'll only be 15 minutes. He managed to install malware, as Terence said, malware is malicious software, onto 38 laptops. He was placed under supervision because he wasn't performing, and he was subsequently fired. And before he was fired, he asked to go and collect a laptop that he had plugged in. He said it was his cousin's laptop at a different workstation, but they didn't allow him to. Luckily, when they actually checked that laptop, they saw that the malware was running, and what it cost them was 11 million Rand. So they spent 8.5 million Rand on upgrading their systems, 1.2 million Rand on removing that installed malware, 30,000 Rand on changing hard drives, and about 400,000 Rand on business interruption losses. I'll talk about a few more interesting ones. Eskom, there was a senior manager named Genevieve Roux, and she was dating somebody who also worked for Eskom. They broke up, so she got another employee to call the call center, impersonate her now ex-boyfriend to get his login details. Once she did that, she then started sending very rude emails from his email account as if it was him. They managed to catch her, and she was fined 40,000 Rand in her personal capacity for hacking and getting access to his system. KFC, a disgruntled IT developer, heard retrenchments were coming up, so he planted a piece of malware called Dexter on their point-of-sale devices. What it did is that it only allowed 1 in every 3 transactions to actually go through. And Gautrain had originally said that they estimated their losses at 800 million Rand, and KFC had said that their loss was bigger than Gautrain. So they won't tell us what the actual financial loss is, but they said that it was bigger than Gautrain. They were South Africa's biggest data breach. Then roll on Standard Bank, and as Terence mentioned, this was a flaw in the outdated ATMs. So an ATM is merely a computer that sits behind that little screen. And they had not updated their ATM's software in quite a long time. And the Japanese mafia managed to get into those ATMs, withdraw 300 million Rand. 15 arrests have been made, and not a single person in South Africa, and not a single South African. View finds 934,000 records exposed. Goliath and Goliath Comedy Club. This is a family-owned business of a bunch of comedians. Kate, who is the sister of the comedians, She does the booking, she does the social media, she does the monetary collections. So she does everything except actual stand-up comedy. And 700 emails were sent from her email account late on a Friday evening. And the email said, please everybody, we're a family-owned business. We need you to settle your outstanding invoice. And by the way, we've changed our bank account from Bank A to Bank B. On Monday, when she got to the office, a friend had called her and said, listen, I've got this email from you about your bank details. I'm going to pay you. I just wanted to check, how your weekend was. And they had a fat chat. And she was like, what are you talking about? I didn't send an email about changing bank details. And that's how they found out the issue. A total of 300,000 Rand in outstanding invoices were settled. And the problem is, if you have paid your invoice, you are not going to pay again. But Goliath and Goliath Comedy Club didn't receive those funds. So AfriHost, who is their service provider, said that they must have fallen for some sort of phishing scam. They must have disclosed the details. It's the same weak excuse that all of the banks use. I'm not going to refund you because this must have been your fault. And that was it. The most unfortunate part is that Goliath and Goliath Comedy Club had to close their brand new, amazing comedy club, which was in Melrose Arch, that they had spent millions on. They had to close that club down following this breach. So let's talk about some claims examples in the travel and tourism industry. So Orbitz, an old version of the Orbitz website was hacked, and that exposed the personal details and payment card info of customers. Orbitz is now owned by Expedia. WWPKG specializes in tours in Japan. Senior management were hacked at head office. The customer database, which contained clients' names, ID numbers, passport numbers, credit card information, phone numbers, email addresses, mailing address, and purchase history was stolen. Booking.com, scammers managed to get customers' details and emailed clients pretending to be that hotel to say that they have booked and they need to settle their account prior to actually arriving. And in order for you to actually have your holiday, you would make that payment. Ticket.com, a team of Indonesian hackers stole 4.1 billion rupees worth of airline tickets for their low-cost carrier called CityLink, and they sold those tickets on Facebook. Worldwide Package Travel Service, they were forced to close all of their stores in Hong Kong after the travel agency's computer systems were locked down and held to ransom by hackers. So when an incident like this occurs, how would you know who to call and how you would actually fix that situation? And furthermore, because South Africa is the third worst country in the world, how is it that 84% of us are victims of cybercrime and we don't know it? So you'll see on your screen a website. It's called haveibeenpwned.com. This is a central repository of data breaches around the world where you can search your email address to see if you have been a victim of a cyber breach. So I'm going to stop the presentation for 1 second, and I'd like to do this all together. So take out your phones, type in haveibeenpwned.com, and then we'll do this exercise together really quickly. Let me stop sharing here. And just turn on my camera. So on my phone, I'm typing haveibeenpwned.com. This is the website, what it looks like. In this white address bar, please can you type in your personal email account? That's your Gmail, your Hotmail, your Yahoo account. It's not your work-owned email. And guys, please feel free to participate. This is not something that's going to expose you in any regard. It is just merely a repository database of breaches where you can search your email address to see if you have been hacked. So
I want to know how many people, sorry to interrupt you, Candace, how many people are going to get something other than, oh no, because I've got oh no on my screen.
But please feel free if you'd like to post in the chat whether you are red or green. So red means that you have been hacked. Green means that you haven't. Green will say good news, red will say oh no. So if I look at my list, it says, oh no, you have been pwned in 14 breaches. If anybody can beat 14, please post that in the comments as well. If you scroll through the list, it will tell you which breaches your details were exposed in, and the bold line under each breach explains what information of yours has been hacked or exposed. So if I can read, I'll read two. Dropbox, in mid-2012, Dropbox suffered a data breach which exposed the stored credentials of tens of millions of customers. My compromised data was my email address and my password. Now, my email address is my username on every single account that I have. My password is exactly the same on every single account that I have. What upsets me about this is that for the last 8 years, every single account I've signed up for, using my email address as my username and my password as my password, that has been freely available on the internet for anybody to see. These databases would then be sold to cyber criminals, where they would use that to try and hack you, spam you, get your banking credentials so that they can eventually steal your money, or for identity theft. So if you are trying to purchase a house and blacklisted, or trying to get married and realize you've been married 7 times, this is how people get your data. So for the last 8 years, Dropbox not once has notified me that my details have been exposed and that I should secure myself. So how can we live in a world where we can be proactive for cybercrime instead of reactive only responding once the incident occurs? So in order for me to secure this account now, because it's my email address and my password, I merely need to change my password to Dropbox. But because my password to Dropbox is the password I use on every other account, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, my Gmail, my Hotmail, my Yahoo, I would have to change all of those passwords. So if your password is exposed on any one of these breaches and you use that password across multiple accounts, please change that today. First and foremost, always change the password on your mailbox, not Dropbox, because what Dropbox will do is it'll email my mailbox to say you've updated your password, and if a hacker's sitting on there, it doesn't matter. If I make it the most complex password in the world, they'll be able to see that. If I read you my next one, Exactus. Exactus publicly leaked 340 million records of personal data. My compromised information, it's a lot. My credit status information, my date of birth, education level, email address, ethnicity, family structure, financial investment, gender, home ownership status, income level, IP address, marital status, name, net worth, occupation, personal interest, phone number, physical address, religion, and spoken language. So realistically, how do I change all of that? The answer is that you don't. You simply don't. So I need to be proactive, start monitoring the post that gets delivered to my house. If anything says you have been approved for a loan, congrats on opening your Woolworths account, I'm going to call that company and say, I didn't open an account. Why are you sending me this card with my personalized name on? That's quite an expensive marketing exercise, which companies don't really do anymore. Now, what upsets me the most about this breach is I have no idea who Exactus is. I've never heard of Exactus. So how is the company that I have never transacted with hacked, and they expose every single shred of personal information on me? And the answer is because companies sell databases. That's how a company that you do not know, are not aware of, have never transacted with, has been hacked, and they expose your entire online identity. So I'm going to go back to the presentation, and I'm more than happy to answer questions about this at the end. If you do not have a personal email and you are using, you typed in your work email and that has come up as red, please immediately notify your IT department. Take a print screen, notify your IT department, because remember, nobody hacks a company and just goes for one person. It is much easier to steal 1 rand from 10,000 people than it is to steal 10,000 rand from one person. So POPI is the Protection of Personal Information Act. It's a fantastic piece of legislation that's taken since 2013 to come into effect, but it now is officially in place. And what this says is that, Candice, as a South African citizen, I have a constitutional right that my data will be protected. And if it is not, the company that breaches that data will have to be liable, will have to be responsible for that. The company, the data custodian, the person who has exposed that data, they are liable for a 10 million rand fine. If they don't have 10 million rand, they're going to jail for 10 years. What scares me about POPI is that POPI is strict liability. It means that no negligence is required. Meaning, sorry, if I'm out on the weekend and I'm shopping in Pick n Pay and my cell phone gets stolen and I get my work emails to my device, even though it's not my fault that my cell phone was stolen, I am liable as the custodian of that device for 10 million rand fine. If I don't have 10 million rand, I'm going to jail for 10 years because I'm the custodian of that device and the data that's on that device. In terms of Section 99(1), which came into effect 1 July 2020, an employer may be held liable for the conduct of its employees, regardless of whether there is willful or negligent conduct on the part of the employer. So not only can the company face a fine, but you as the custodian of that device, of that data, of that paper file, of that memory stick, can also be held liable. If you do not notify the regulator that Candace's cell phone was stolen and Candace gets work emails to her device, then you are in contravention of the Act, and the company and you can face that fine. So Poppy is quite scary. So let's talk about a solution on how to solve the cybercrime pandemic. And it's something, and I don't use that word lightly. So a cyber insurance policy is a policy that you can purchase as a company that will provide cover against a network breach or a privacy breach. If I can explain it in the most basic terms, a network breach means you must be hacked. Regardless of how that happens, if you are hacked, the policy will respond. And a privacy breach is a breach of confidentiality or right to privacy of any employee or any customer, client, supplier, patient of the company. So the policy will cover internal first party as well as external third party exposures. Your third party is your client. If you're a hospital, it would be your patients. But what does the policy actually do? What does the policy cover? So your insuring clause A is your cyber liability, and that will defend you, the insured company, if there is a privacy breach or a network breach. So it's the defense and settlement of a customer suing you because you were hacked or because there was a privacy breach. The fines and penalties, this is the fines and penalties to the extent insurable by law. Because Poppy is strict liability and no negligence is required, they have said that you are able to purchase insurance to cover that fine. So the Poppy fine, if you had a cyber policy, would be covered. And you wouldn't have to be worried or scared to notify the regulator, and you would do what is in the best interest of the company. Insuring clause B is your crisis management and notification expenses. What that module covers is notifying every single person you've ever dealt with. It would cover things like PR campaigns. A PR campaign is going to provide spokesperson training to the person in the company that will address media, whether it's on social media, radio, TV, newspaper, however you so decide. Sometimes it's more important what you don't say than what you do say, and we will help you with that with a proper professional PR company. There is remediation services as well as credit and identity theft monitoring for every single person in that company. For that reason, it is important when underwriting a cyber policy that you tell us how many records you are storing. So if you have 100 employees and 1,000 clients, your exposure is not 1,100 because you may have had a data destruction policy of the last 5 years, which means that you're storing that data for the last 5 years. And if somebody hacks you, every single person will be exposed. So it's important for you to quantify and understand your business now, before a breach happens, as to what your true exposure is. The next module is data recovery and business interruption. That is cost for specialists, not your next door neighbor's cousin who studied computers in 1996, proper forensic specialists to investigate, contain, manage, and recover the business operations. It covers your business interruption. So for the amount of time that you are down and you cannot trade, whether you are a hotel or an attorney, if you cannot conduct your business because all your data is encrypted and you can't access anything, that is a loss of business income or business interruption to you. A cyber policy has a non-physical damage business interruption trigger, because if I've hacked your server, I haven't broken down the door, I haven't necessarily, could have, but I haven't necessarily stolen that server. I can do it via my computer at home. So there's a non-physical damage trigger on a cyber policy's business interruption. It would cover the cost to restore and recover your data and operations, and even things like increased cost of working, because now we all have to work over a weekend to get our invoices out because we haven't been able to actually access any of our systems for the last 3 days. And then the loss of business income is the income you would have earned had a breach not happened. Our next module is your cyber extortion. That is when you are held to ransom, exactly like Terence explained. What this module will do is it will investigate, is this a legitimate threat? Does somebody actually have your data? Do they have data on clients from A to Z, or is it only A, B, and C? Because that response is very different. And if necessary, if we cannot unencrypt, decrypt, unencrypt your systems ourselves, then we would pay that ransom from your policy. Obviously, it's important to purchase an appropriate limit, but we would help you and guide you in terms of determining what that limit is. Our last module is your digital media liability, and that is for the liability associated with social media content, video, graphics, audios, anything that you put online that results in defamation, unintentional infringement, or unintentional invasion or interference. The cyber policy would respond to that. Depending on what your business does, there are some optional modules that you can purchase. So what I've explained to you so far is the standard cyber insurance policy, regardless of what company you are. That is the policy that you would purchase. We'll talk about cost at the end. And bearing in mind that if you have a computer, an employee, or a client, you have a cyber exposure. If you can tell me any company in the world that doesn't operate on a computer, have a client, or have an employee, then I will give you cyber insurance for free. So if you operate in the cloud, because you are the custodian of that data, you are still held liable. You can't say, oh, but I use AWS, therefore I negate all responsibility. So depending on your business, there are some optional modules that you can purchase. The initial response phase that waives your deductible for a period of 72 hours. We would only really consider offering that module to a client that has a really big deductible. So say 250,000 or R1 million deductible. Then you could purchase the initial response phase. Your e-financial loss, because a cyber policy is a reactive incident response policy responding to a network breach or a privacy breach, any financial loss, any theft of funds is specifically excluded in the policy. If you are a client that would like to cover that, we are able to extend the policy and cover that. And we call it e-financial loss. It's the unrecoverable loss of money belonging to or for which you, the insured, are legally responsible. Your OSP is your outsourced service provider. That means that you can extend your cyber policy to cover an outsourced service provider for the provision of the services that they provide to you. So it is not a full cyber insurance policy for that provider. It only covers the services that they provide to you. It extends your policy to cover them and include them. The physical damage is the cost to replace, repair, or repair any direct physical damage of tangible property, property that you can touch, physical property, as a direct result of a system incident. Your phone phreaking is when somebody hacks into your VoIP or your PABX system, and then they use that to make premium rated calls, and your average phone bill goes from 10,000 to 75,000 Rand. If you are a travel agency and it's a family-owned business and you're operating from home on your cell phone that has a 2,500 Rand cap on calls, it wouldn't make sense for you to purchase this module. But we will help you and we will guide you. And then PCI DSS is Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. If you accept payment via debit or credit card and you swipe a debit or a credit card on that little point of sale device, you must be PCI DSS accredited under Visa and Merchant. Very few people are, meaning that they are not following the protocols to store that credit card or debit card information. But you can face quite hefty penalties if there is a breach, and this is what the PCI DSS module will help you with. In terms of our incident response, how we respond to an incident, there are 5 people that will make up your incident response team. So you have your insurance broker, the person that sold you the cyber policy. You have the underwriter, like I too, the person who underwrote the policy. But your incident response team consists of those 2 and 5 individuals. 1, an attorney who's dealt with cyber breaches and knows what to do. 2, forensics to tell you how the incident occurred, because only when you know how it occurred can you stop it happening again. Incident containment, that's the person who will clean up the systems, start doing the data recovery, start removing the malware, and they would help quantify your business interruption. A PR company to deal with the reputational damage associated with a cyber breach, and then a company for the remediation services, which is your credit and identity theft monitoring. Key exclusions of a cyber policy, if there was any prior circumstances, so it works exactly the same as car insurance. You can't crash your car, go to a company, purchase car insurance, and try a claim for that crash. So if there was a prior incident, that is 100% excluded. If your policy is incepting on the 1st of September, then you wouldn't have cover prior to that. I wanted to just quickly touch on Liberty's cyber breach. Liberty's hack, once they had notified and gone to public with that breach, their share price fell by 5%, which totaled more than R1 billion losses. For them to send out those 4 SMSs cost them R6 million. They had purchased cyber insurance. Their policy incepted the 1st of July. The hack happened the middle of June. So they had no cover, meaning that all of those costs have to be covered under the bottom line of the company. And they have said that nobody, not any person in a managerial position, no staff member, will receive a bonus or an increase for the next 3 years to cover that loss. So even if you work for a massive company and think, I'll just click on this link, I'll open this attachment, I'm going to download porn on my laptop, who cares, my company has lots of money, they'll be able to sustain that loss. You are the person that will ultimately be the one that pays for that by not receiving bonuses and increases. So any prior circumstance, completely excluded. I'm not going to go over all of these just in the interest of time, but I'm happy to answer some questions. It's your standard insurance exclusions. And then very last is our minimum security requirements. I want to spend a second on this. So in order for you to purchase insurance to insure a warehouse, you would have to have fire hydrants, you'd have to have security, you'd have to have a security gate. It's exactly the same in cyber insurance. So what we can't do for the premiums, and I'll explain that on the next slide, is give you R1 million cover for a tiny little premium if you've gone to Macro and bought a laptop and that's how you're operating your business. So there has to be some sort of minimum requirements. These are a condition of cover and they are in place at inception and must be maintained throughout the duration of the policy. So very simple things. You must have a firewall. You must have antivirus or anti-malware installed. You must update your patches and do any updates within 12 months of release, which is more than fair. You must have some sort of password control. So there's quite a lot of controversy around passwords and multi-factor authentication. If you had multi-factor authentication, then we would bypass the password controls. But as an absolute minimum, we've listed, you can see on the screen, you must have 8 characters. You must change that password every 120 days. It's definitely not something that is onerous on the company. You must use multi-factor authentication or VPN in order to access sensitive systems. This is whether you are working from home or from the office. You must have accounts restricted to the minimum required levels to perform the business functions, meaning that if you hired me, I wouldn't be able to access HR files and see what every person's salary is and see who's had a disciplinary hearing. I would only be able to access the files that I am authorized to do. Controls to implement and restrict access on your wireless network. So if you have wireless network at the office and your staff members can join that, can they get into the company's documentation? So if I came to do a presentation at your office and I wanted to do this and I said I needed the internet, would I be able to get into your full company files as a complete outsider? Or is there segregation of your wireless network? There must be controls to restrict physical access to your office as well as your server room. Your logs must be stored for a minimum of 6 months. Why? Because that is the only way that someone will be able to do a forensic report to Poppy, which by law you would have to submit, and it must be an independent report. The only way we can see when and how the hacker got into your system is by analyzing the logs. So if you are only storing your logs for 30 days, you are going to be in contravention of Poppy and you will face a R10 million fine. So these are all requirements for risk mitigation, not only to help you get a low premium, but it's things that you should be doing as a standard anyway. User privileges must be revoked within 30 days of termination of employment. There's no point, exactly like KFC, no point if I can still access my company 6 months after I've left it because you forgot to remove my access on my personally owned cell phone, which I've taken with me. You must have a disaster recovery and business continuity plan. You must generate backups. We can't do data recovery if your backups haven't been running. And you must monitor for the successful generation of the backups. And you must test the ability to restore from those backups at least every 6 months. For you to do any of these shouldn't cost you as the company anything to actually implement, unless you don't have things like firewalls, which would be really bizarre. So let's talk about how much it costs. cyber insurance doesn't have to be expensive. We have our IT-Go offering. These are not available to the companies mentioned at the bottom. So financial institution, call center, payment card aggregator. But let's talk about what it actually does, who it will cover. So if your revenue is between 0 and 10 million rand, your deductible, which is your excess, is 15,000 rand. Your annual premium is going to cost you 5,375. So it's under 500 rand a month for you to have a R1 million cyber insurance cover. The premiums go up per limit, so it's 1, 2.5, 5, 10, 15, and 25 million rand cover. If your revenue was 105 million, you'd fall into that bottom line, and you can see what the annual premiums are. This is full cyber insurance cover. If you wanted limits above 25 million, if your revenue was above 250 million, you wouldn't qualify for this offering, and we'd have to underwrite you from scratch and assign a premium. But cyber insurance is something that can save your company. I'll tell you a horrific story. Our forensic company called Untitled dealt with a matter earlier in the year, just before lockdown. A hacker had managed to get onto the system. They spent a substantial amount of time learning how the CEO addressed the bookkeeper, how the language that he would use, how he would speak to her in emails. When he was ready to launch the attack, he sent an email saying, I just want to check how much money is in our bank account. She had said this exact many rands and cents. So he knew that he had her because she had responded. He said, okay, great. I need to do some renovations at home. I've put cash flow back in. Please can you transfer every single rand and cent to my personal bank account? With zero hesitation, she did it. A couple of days later, the genuine CEO thought, what is going on? Why is there no money in the account? Spoke to her. She said, but you told me to. I've transferred it. Here's the proof of payment. They contacted the bank. The money had been withdrawn. It was gone. That CEO, family-owned accounting business, father and son business, he committed suicide. Company went into lockdown. And 3 weeks after that, the son committed suicide because they had zero money. They could do nothing. They were not generating any income. They had staff members that they had to pay. So a cyber event isn't just data recovery, cyber extortion, and all that sexy stuff. It's something that can financially cripple and ruin an entire family. And for 500 rand a month, come on, it just makes sense. So in closing, I want to show you a really quick video. I think it's hilarious, just about the dangers of working from home. So please enjoy.
Open to slide 3 from the
So
PDF
now,
I sent you this
can I
morning.
actually hop off this call since I'm not on this account?
It's no problem.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sean.
Sure. Let's just start off with January 2020. Now, consumer spending is up. If you look at the graph right below.
What page are we on?
I'm sorry, we're on page 12, the second graph from the top.
Okay.
Daniel, turn your camera off.
All right. So if you look, we're 0.15% higher than 2019. We started this quarter off at 2.75%.
Holy shit. Oh,
Daniel.
God.
I don't think he's
Daniel.
January.
Can you do that for us?
Daniel.
Daniel.
Call Mika.
Oh my God.
You call Daniel on his cell. Call Daniel on his cell. How do we turn this sheet off?
Shit.
Wow.
We can't.
Oh, hell no.
Daniel. Oh my God. Daniel is the host. Holy shit.
This recording.
Oh my God. Oh.
Yes.
Daniel.
No.
Open to slide 3 from
That is it from me. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. Thank you for allowing me to present. I appreciate it and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Candace. Just what we need to wake us up on a Wednesday morning. We have had loads of questions come through. Thanks for that. And now I have to ask them. Damn.
Sorry.
How do you follow that?
Sorry.
All right. The good news is that we have done several of these cybersecurity webinars before. So some of the questions that I know will be pressing on your mind, like things around how often should I update my browser? And is an Apple safer than a normal PC, for example? Those are all questions that we have responded to in previous webinars, and we can give you that information so that you've got that, so that you can try and mitigate the risk yourself. But as Terence said a little bit earlier, it's literally like if you can imagine a row of houses, and some of the houses having walls and some of the houses not having walls. And they're obviously going to go for the guys that essentially are the easiest to get into. So I'm going to deal with some of the technical aspects before we hand over to Candice and ask her to just unpack some of the insurance aspects. So Gisela asked, and I think this will probably be Terence who answered it, is it an absolute requirement to have a VPN?
So, I mean, as you just heard from Candice, if you're going to go for an insurance, absolutely, it's a minimum. But I think even if you don't go for insurance, just to protect yourself, yes, absolutely. I would definitely say, especially in where we are now, a minimum of a VPN gives you that level of security and an antivirus software. And I think, Natalia, that was a question we had before also, is you know, do I need antivirus software? Absolutely, because that detects malware. It can pick up ransomware, pick up issues of where there might be something malicious in your environment. It can pick up for, or it can also protect your passwords on your machine. It can encrypt your machine. So these days, you know, antivirus software has become very sophisticated compared to what it was 15 years ago. So absolutely, I think antivirus software, pay the little bit of extra money, get the top of the range package, not just antivirus, get the firewall protection, and most of them these days come with VPN. So yes, I would say in today's time, it is absolutely necessary, even if you don't want to go the insurance route, but you've heard from Candice, you know, they'll not provide that cover unless you have almost those minimum requirements, and that is the minimum ticket.
So I see Laurencia has actually pasted in the chat, but we have had questions on the Q&A around that antivirus software. So she said, would free antiviruses such as Avast Safe for both work and home devices work? And then David, for example, and I'm also on an Apple, has said, do I need to install antivirus? And if so, what antivirus would you suggest for someone who's got a Mac, for example?
So I think firstly let's maybe start with the first question. I think most certainly the free antivirus gives you some level of protection, okay? But it's free because of a reason versus a paid service. The paid services generally, they come up with signature, what we call antivirus update files, and they automatically update, etc., etc. And they do that as an exposure happens or as a malware gets identified, a signature is written. So think of it when you get a cold and you get sick and you get a vaccine for it type of thing, okay? So the moment something's exposed and you get an injection, it will prevent you from being exposed. So it's in a similar way. So when that happens, in freeware, you don't always have it as often. So something like Avast is there, but you might not get it automatic and you might not be updated as regular as a paid service. But it does give you the minimum protection. You know, it's better than having nothing at all. I think having nothing really exposes you. Having something like Avast gives you that level, but it's not at the higher grade level. It's almost like at a, not even, I wouldn't say a minimum entry level, but it gives you a level of protection. But I would certainly pay because you're paying that premium for a reason from that perspective. Yes, in terms of antivirus software for Android and Mac, you do get various forms of it. There's so many different, they all do the same. So whichever one that you find affordable for you will work just as well. I'm not going to prescribe one over the other, but literally if it's a paid service, then I would definitely say you would need for Mac and for Android devices as well. In fact,
so
sorry. Now, the way iOS is written, it is a little bit more difficult to penetrate or to sort of break, so to speak, or to hack versus a normal Android phone, which is basically a Windows device or Windows based. So it's a little bit more secure, but not 100%, because I've had instances of where iPhones and iMacs were hacked as well.
Well, you know, you've talked about phones, and I think we often think that this kind of thing is only going to happen on our laptops. We don't actually realize that we have just as much a chance of it happening on our phones. And if I look at just on social media with all these stupid avatars, please, if I look at another avatar on Facebook, I think I'm going to scream. We get involved in lots of stuff we wouldn't get involved in our computers. We would do very happily on our phones. So talk to me a little bit about how to make sure that we avoid that on our mobile phones and what we can do to mitigate our risk on mobile.
Look, mobile is very difficult also, and purely because of the fact that malware is written into apps that you download, and you don't know about it. So you'll think, oh, here's a cool game. In fact, about 2 years ago, or the standard not the iOS, the standard Android operating system came in with from Samsung, came in with built-in malware, which no one knew about, which Samsung themselves were actually utilizing to exploit information on your phone from that perspective. And that was a big thing about 2 years ago. And then we found out that there were apps that were written that contained malware that was literally just sitting in the back, logging information about which sites you were visiting, tracking information, tracking your passwords, tracking all sorts of things, okay? And you don't know that because it's happening in the background. Absolutely, yes, that's exactly the expression. So the only thing that, again, that you can do is I know McAfee, Kaspersky, there's a number of them that actually now offer a mobile or a software that you download on your mobile, which helps you. It works in something called a container or containerization. So it literally blocks everything in that app for you and literally monitors any activity. Again, it's not 100%. But it does help you, or it does flag the fact that we're about to download this. Something looks malicious in here. Do you want to download it? Whereas before you would have just been downloading and you wouldn't have known, you wouldn't have been none the wiser from that perspective. So phones are a little bit more difficult. I will attest to that, but there are ways, and there is definitely software that you can load on your phones that will certainly help or certainly increase the awareness of you're about to download something and something doesn't look kosher from that perspective. It's at least a warning.
So Terence, you know, now that Candace and you have put the fear of God into me and my information and where it's going and all sorts of wonderful things, what about information on the cloud? So here I am thinking, oh, this is cool. I'm just going to throw everything into SharePoint or into Google Drive or whatever. That's now my responsibility's gone, because surely they spend loads of money making sure that that information isn't hackable, or, you know, I don't have any liability there. Talk to me about information on the cloud and working on the internet. You know, even like you've spoken to me before about clicking from a link onto the internet and what I need to be looking for. Just unpack that for me a little bit.
Okay, so let's start with cloud and then we'll move to internet. So yes, generally, so yes and no. So cloud environments have become far more sophisticated than what they were a few years ago. Both AWS, and I think the biggest cloud providers today is AWS or Amazon, and Microsoft's Azure. And both of them have invested substantially in security, in securing their environments from that perspective. Having said that, I mean, there are still remain targets literally day in and day out because of people that have moved data into the cloud environment. And from that perspective, yes, they still remain targets, but they are definitely in a better position than you trying to protect your data in your local machine or in your local at home on your machine. They definitely have more resources and tools to protect the data. And I don't think you can ever, you know, they say the more money you spend, the less downtime you have. Now, I don't know anyone who's got less more money that can spend on saying I'm 100% protected, because they will find a way. They will always find a way to exploit you in whichever way, mean or manner. But it is a little bit more safer, and cloud environments are becoming a lot more, let's say, if I think about the house again, they definitely have, you know, the bells and whistles of the cameras and the electric fence, et cetera, et cetera. And as I said, they're investing a lot more money. Microsoft last year, I think, invested over $3 billion just on their security platforms. So absolutely, it is still a risk, but it is definitely a lot more secure. And these guys obviously run a type of monitoring software and tools. They have something called what we call SOC or SIEM, which is basically security operation centers and event logs that Candace mentioned that they review literally every hour on the hour. They have lots of AI sitting in the background that starts to look at information flow in and out. And the moment they pick up something, they then report it, and they try and reduce the risk from that perspective. So absolutely, I think cloud is definitely going to be there. And I think a lot of people are putting the information more on the cloud because it is and does have a little bit more level of security than me trying to secure it on my hard drive at home from that perspective. The internet, yes, absolutely. Again, you know, that's where the VPN becomes so important, because once you have that VPN connection, anything that you transact between A and B is really then encrypted, and will so, you know, someone will have to really battle to determine or decipher what information is being passed across the wire from that perspective. And clicking on links that will lead you to fraudulent IP website addresses, as I mentioned, if you don't see the HTTPS, that's the first sign that it's not secure from that perspective. And don't transact in that manner, because then anything that you do is in plain text. So as I would type my document in Word, it would be sending that in plain text from that perspective. So be very careful of links that you receive that you don't know, especially if you don't know that someone is sending me something and you click on this link. The moment you click on the link, that malware will download and will trigger at a certain point in time. So I think it's very important from that perspective of how and what we do and how we get to that level of ensuring that protection. But yes, it is important that we don't click on links unless we understand where is it coming from or going to.
Well, as Candice illustrated earlier, many of us have been breached and have absolutely no idea that we have been breached. But let's say, Christo, for argument's sake, that now I can see something's funny is going on. What, number one, where do I start in terms of a security audit? And number two, is there a way for me to report this to someone, and will they really care? Will anything happen?
Yeah, if I can just answer on that. Thanks, Natalia. I think, you know, the first point, and also what Candice mentioned, is you need to have this matter investigated. You need to have somebody who's got cyber experience to investigate the matter, properly investigated, and then obviously you can report this matter to the South African Police Services. So that is definitely something that you can do. Now also, you know, what we find, what we normally do is we would go and do a forensic image of the contaminated hard drive or laptop, if I can say that, make a forensic image, and then we can see whether the virus infection happened. And, you know, in a way, we can go then to the service provider. Normally what will happen is we'll have to subpoena the service provider to get the information to see where the actual device, in some instances, are that is also responsible for sending out the problem, and by means of that you can have it investigated by the South African Police Services.
Thanks.
But it is difficult in some instances, because we have found in some instances where the criminals are operating from internet cafes, and at the time that you get the subpoenas and you get the investigation done, they are already gone. So, and in some instances, these criminals, they operated from remote locations. So it is very difficult to investigate it. And that's why, again, you know, the important thing is prevention. You know, prevent this, don't let it happen. It is difficult to investigate this matter because it's a faceless criminal, and they sometimes sit in remote locations.
Mm. Terence, last question, and Christo, you might want to come in as well, just around mitigating that risk. And if I was a small business and I needed to do something today to make sure that I built the brick wall outside, put the barbed wire out, made sure that everyone was locked down so they would go to the next house, what would be the 5 things that you told me to do today to try and safeguard my business? Short and sharp.
Short and sharp. So I think the first thing would be is make sure you have a firewall. And again, it doesn't have to be expensive. These things used to cost an arm and a leg. They don't anymore. So first thing is make sure you have a firewall. Secondly is make sure you have some form of VPN or virtual private network software that you are connecting to the internet with. And that gives you the level of security in the fact that everything that you're transmitting is encrypted. Thirdly is have an antivirus software, and make sure that the antivirus software has got an automatic update that the moment some new signature file comes in, it will automatically update your signature file or your antivirus software package. 4, I would definitely say, you know, be careful and look out for phishing. So don't respond to any emails that there's a link. Always question something, or if someone says there's a SARS refund or just be careful around that. And then lastly, you know, if you are going to transact, make sure that you have the HTTPS on the logo, that if it's a bank, whether it's Standard Bank, whichever one of the banks, anything that you're going to do. In fact, even if you're doing retail shopping, a lot of people spend a lot of time on the net doing shopping. Make sure that that has got an S on it, that it at least offers some level of security. And don't store, I think Candace mentioned it, don't store or change, keep your information on your browser. I think we've had that question before. The moment you do that, it creates and saves a browser file. And the moment someone hacks your machine, that's the first thing they'd go and look at, because that's got all the sites you visited with the specific login and the password. So don't save passwords. So that would be my 5 probably top tips to say, where do you start? Those are pretty much what you can start with. And any antivirus software, the highest package has all of those functionality that I've mentioned, even up to what they call a password manager or password vault that encrypts your information from that perspective. And then lastly, in fact, maybe point number 6 is to make sure that you don't use any USB sticks in your machine. And if you do, be around someone who does want to do something, or make sure that it is also set to scan. And that's again where the first point of entry. If it's not through an electronic device like email, then it will be through your USB. So those will be my sort of 5 top things.
Thanks, Terence. So Candace has got a couple of minutes before she has to drop off, actually. So if I could just ask Candace a couple of questions, and we'll come back to you, Christo, if that's cool, around the questions that we received around insurance. So how would I establish what cyber insurance cover limit I need, from Carla?
Excellent question. Thank you. So first point is to start off by analyzing how much data you have. And then the most scientific way is to use the Ponemon data breach study. The 2020 report says that it's going to cost you 2,325 Rand per record breached. And you have to assume that every single record will be exposed. So take the amount of employees, add the amount of clients, look at your data destruction policy and find out what your total exposure is, times that by 2,325 Rand, and that should be the base limit that you start at. If you are a typical SME, then another route to go is half revenue or double revenue. So let's pretend your revenue is 5 million Rand. Then you would look at options of 2.5 million, 5 million, or 10 million Rand cyber insurance. But we will help you with that. So if you don't know, you have absolutely no idea, it's sometimes good to guide us in terms of the deductible. So that is the first amount payable. It's your excess, exactly like you have on a car insurance policy. And if you are a company that's comfortable carrying a 50,000 Rand deductible, then that will bring down your premium, and we will then provide you with a range of options. Or you can say, you know, we're comfortable carrying self-insuring 250,000 Rand, or whatever that amount is. So our minimum deductible is 15,000 Rand. Our minimum limit is 1 million Rand limit. Our maximum limit is 150 million. And then we can get excess layer insurance if you need it higher than that. So there's 2 rules of thumb: half revenue, double revenue, or add the amount of employees and clients times 2,325, and that should be your base limit that you purchase.
Okay, Veronica said, you mentioned that the VPN is a requirement to get insurance. Is it always the case? Why can't the premium be higher based on risk exposure assessment?
Sure. So thank you for that question. Considering that we are giving you $1 million cyber cover for a 500 Rand a month premium, there are requirements and you have to comply. So yes, you have to have a VPN. There's nothing that would substitute that. It's not like the passwords where you could rather do multi-factor authentication. It would be a very bad business model and business decision for us as underwriters to insure somebody that has absolutely no sort of security. So in order for you to access your sensitive and private information, your client's data, when you are not in the office plugged into the network, you would have to use a VPN, non-negotiable.
Okay, one last question before I let you go.
Perfect.
And I'm actually not sure that you will be able to respond to it, so you might get out of it. But you know, we as the tourism industry, and it's the elephant in the room, I don't have an elephant in the background, but it is the elephant in the room, have been very burnt in the last couple of months around business interruption insurance and what pays out, what doesn't pay out. So the question is, are there potentially any threats that may not be covered in the insurance policy, such as that kind of lockdown clause that we had in our BI? I know that's a bit of an open-ended question, but what are the things that we should be looking at?
It's a great question. And we must remember that a cyber policy, you have different policies that cover different things. A cyber policy responds to a network breach and a privacy breach. So if you have suffered a network breach, you have been hacked, or there's been a privacy breach, the cyber policy will respond. If you suffer business interruption losses because of COVID, that's not going to be covered by a cyber policy. There's no network breach, there's no privacy breach. So in terms of the exclusions, they are your standard insuring exclusions. So it's your prior circumstances, bodily injury, which is never going to happen from a cyber breach, but you have to include it. Contractual breach, if you are using outdated software or pirated software, we would not cover that because that's contrary to public policy. It's illegal to cover fraud, so we wouldn't be able to cover that. Anything like betterment or upgrading your IT system because there's been an event and now it's determined by the forensics that you have to purchase new tech or new firewalls, the policy is not going to pay to upgrade your IT system. But if you are hacked or you suffer a privacy breach, the cyber policy will respond to the costs to get you back up online. You must always remember the trigger. It is a reactive incident response policy responding to a network breach or a privacy breach.
Great. Thank you, Candice. I'm conscious you have another meeting now, so you're welcome to go off into the distance. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Very great. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to leave the webinar open for another 5 minutes. Christo, you wanted to add to something that Terence had said earlier.
Yes, I just want to add one extra precaution, and that's something that I mentioned. Candice also mentioned it. Guys, don't just accept an email for a banking request change. Make sure that you contact your client, your supplier, the contractor. Make sure you phone the bank and make it a policy in your business as well. As I said this morning, again, I had another incident where one of my clients, they just simply acted on the email and they lost a lot of money. So now they must get an attorney they've got a dispute with in terms of the payment of the funds. So please make sure, don't just accept email correspondence for change of banking details. Make sure that you pay it in the right bank account. That's a simple thing and you can prevent yourself a lot of hassle.
Thank you, Christo. If you want to throw in some last minute questions, we won't be able to answer them in the session, but we will answer them after the fact. So please send your question through and we will get the answers through to you. So don't think that because we're closing off the webinar, we won't get back to you. So 2 more questions, and Terence, I think they're probably going to be to you. The one is around a recommended password manager, because now obviously we're not allowed to use the same password. We've been told that is not a good thing. So what can I use as a password manager to make sure that I'm using passwords correctly?
So I think just maybe a rule of thumb, which is fairly inexpensive, you can actually do it yourself in Excel if you want to. So I'll give you the easy version, and then most of the password managers, so if you have any antivirus software, McAfee, Kaspersky, Bitdefender, they all have them, is you can then use one of those password managers. But very easily, it's a combination of alphanumeric numbers in greater extent, and instead of using, for example, a password, try using a sentence or a combination of let's say a street name and your name, or your address and something else. So the longer you make it, the more difficult it becomes. So people always take a phrase, for example, or a book phrase, and then add characters in the front and the back, and that you can keep fairly simple if you want, and change them as the phrase. So take any book and you just change the phrases as you go along from that perspective, and that will be something very difficult. And then obviously if you do have antivirus software, they come with password managers, and then they will then sort of generate a password manager for you, and all of them have them. So McAfee's got them, Kaspersky's got them, Bitdefender's got them. They all have them now. So there's no one specific one. Yeah. And again, I wouldn't go and get freeware for a password manager. I'd use the paid service from that perspective.
Okay. Right. So the question around social media, because obviously we're now using social media a great deal. What are the cybersecurity risks within social media we should pay attention to and to safeguard ourselves?
Okay, so I think the cybersecurity risks leads back to a little bit of Poppy or what Candice was talking about. So the more information you put out there of yourself. So the first thing you must remember, and I think Candice alluded to it, the moment I put personal information out on the internet, I've got no recourse because I'm putting it into a public domain. And then secondly, that type of information can then get used to exploit me. So for example, I wouldn't just very now, the moment I go up to the Greek Isles or up to Miami and take pictures and say, hey, I'm here with my family and we're having a good time and, you know, there's no one at home or whatever, people can deduce the fact that I'm there and I'm away from home. And all of a sudden in my privacy settings in Facebook, it's all exposed. So people can go and look at my profile and all of a sudden see, oh, this is where Terence lives. And he's, by the way, away for 2 weeks. Let's go and see what is in his house. So that's the first thing where actual criminals, hardcore criminals will come to your house. And then secondly, we'll start to hack that personal information that you've just put out there and use that to impersonate you. As Christo mentioned, that impersonation is essentially how the phishing begins. So they build an entire profile. I mean, they take a couple of seconds to hack you, but don't forget, they've been observing you. They've been following your digital footprint for months. So be very careful with the amount of information, the amount of personal information you put out on social media, because it could bite you both from a public perspective and a cybercrime perspective. Any bit of information they will utilize against you, they will certainly do that. And that's why even, I mean, I was advising a school the other day, and nowadays they have to get permission from you to put their kids' photos on to the website, because apparently that's how the kid or child trafficking was happening, was people were looking at the kids, looking at the school website and seeing this person and seeing what they want and seeing what they did and decided this is the person that we're going to target. So they knew which school they were going to, they just have to find the face. And then they follow your home so they know where you live. So do you see how the one builds to the next, to the next, to the next? It's one bit of information, but they build a whole profile around you. They almost build a mind map around you. It is absolutely scary. I don't mean to scare anyone, but it is absolutely scary of what is being done and what is actually happening.
You've done a great job. I'm terrified. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. So we have recorded the session, and what we will do is we will take all the questions we've received, create an FAQ, but also provide you with the FAQs from previous recorded sessions that we have actually done with Krista and Terence, who are the most amazing and valuable resources when it comes to cybersecurity. Guys, cybersecurity is a bit like COVID, here to stay, I'm afraid. And unfortunately, we have to learn to live with it and mitigate our risk, just as we have to do with COVID. So my thanks to both Terence and to Christo for again joining me and unpacking this very complicated topic and making it approachable. Candice, as you could see, had to hop off, but just a disclaimer that Candice is an underwriter. So she is not the person you would speak to if you are wanting to get cybersecurity insurance and to protect yourself that way. What you need to do is contact your broker. Your broker will work with someone like Candice, for example, to help make sure that you are as covered as possible in the eventuality of this kind of thing happening. Any parting shots, Terence and Krista, before we close off?
No, all good. I think if everyone just got some bit of guidance, I'm happy. And some awareness, I'm happy.
Perfect.
Good.
And Krista,
thank you.
Yeah, from my side, I can also say, guys, if there's anything that you've got any other questions or some uncertainties, you know, please feel free to contact me at Mazars. I'm more than happy to speak to you guys. You know, if there's anything you want to speak to me, and you can also, Natalia, you can also give us my email address as well. I'm more than happy to speak to anybody to give any guidance.
Thank you, Krista. And I know Terence and Krista have always been so helpful with the tourism and travel industry. They have a great understanding of our industry, and that helps a lot when you're trying to navigate these very murky waters. So my thanks to everyone for joining us today. We have gone over time. Apologies for that. And I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Have a great day, guys. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.